the sound quality.
No, don't put that on me. Don't.
Picking up my heartbeat.
Ow.
And I'm like leaning out my COVID residue.
Yeah. No, that's not on me, Dr. Steve. You got to sort out your organic, ness.
But I move in the chair and it picks it up too.
Yeah, that's okay. I think people like the sound. This is like ASMR. Are you familiar with the term ASMR?
I know a little bit about it.
Yeah, people would dig that. So, to our legion of listeners, once again, Dr. Steve and I have had a very illuminating off-camera discussion. We talked about a lot of cool stuff. And I think what we were talking about, net, I think we're on the same page. And this is on camera, so, hey, if there are questions that you find yourself wanting to ask, but you're curious as to like, ooh, is this going to get too close to a boundary for Alex or whatnot? Is he going to feel comfortable talking about this? Like, I'm an open book. I'm pretty transparent in terms of here's where the chapter ends. Here's where the book closes. Uh-huh. I'm an open book about the closed book policy. I'm transparent about what is
where
the restriction. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. But one place I do want to go, and hopefully there's something to talk about here. But at the end of our last session, we talked about
when I don't respond. Is that what you're going to talk about?
No. Oh, we did talk about this. So everyone listening there, you might notice periods of silence. And I told Dr. Steve, I have anxiety. I get a little anxious because I worry that he's listening to what I'm saying and being like, what are you talking about, Alex? I worry about being too vicissitude-y. I worry about, talking about stuff that doesn't interest him. But as you explained to me, that's not the case.
Right.
That you are just observing, and sometimes you're like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Right now I'm thinking about a Far Side. You remember the Gary Larson's Far Side cartoons? You ever know those?
Vaguely.
Yeah.
What did they look like?
Well, I mean, just witty commentaries
and
stuff like that. So anyway, there was one where there was a psychiatrist who was sitting, in his therapy chair, and the patient's on the couch, and the psychiatrist has a notepad and it just says, "Just plain nuts." Those are the words on the,
Yeah.
So I think about that a lot.
That's vicissitude.
I think you'd like Gary Larson's humor.
I used to love the Sunday comics section.
Yeah.
I grew up in an era when that was like 10 pages, It was so sad. I looked at, my parents still get it, and I looked at it was like maybe 2.5 pages, 3 pages now.
Yeah.
The days of cartoon have come and gone. But I have a ton of Calvin Hobbes. What was that guy's name? I'm blanking on his name. Tom Watson,
yeah,
I believe his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved Calvin Hobbes because very witty, philosophical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Comics had a very good way of being succinct and getting to like the human condition in like 15 seconds.
Yeah.
But so we were talking about shamans, and our discussion about my experience with dissociation led to another chat with my real life therapist about just revisiting that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious if if you've read about or heard about psilocybin treatments. You're familiar with that? It's basically like the extract of like mushrooms. You haven't heard about this? So they're using it as a treatment. Apparently it's one of the treatment methods for dissociation.
Like mushrooms, like
psychedelic mushrooms.
Mushrooms, or like shiitake.
No, not portobello. No. It's basically like a therapist and probably like a physician's assistant or maybe a nurse. Like the two of them shaman you. Make sure, so you go on a trip and then your therapist like works through trauma or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't know it by name. I know that they're experimenting with hallucinogenics with trauma. Yeah,
so that's one of the treatment methods for dissociation, and another one is
EMDR.
EMDR.
Eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Yeah, which won't surprise you, but between the two, I'd be more enticed to try the psilocybin treatment. That seems like more up my alley.
Shroom therapy.
Yeah, shroom therapy seems more fun, if I'm going to be completely honest. But I don't know much about EDMR.
EDM.
Yeah, that's why I keep saying EDMR.
Yeah.
EMDR. I don't know too much about it, but apparently it's very well researched, or I don't know.
Becoming more well established. It's becoming more evidence based, and it's a process of rethinking about traumatic experiences and accessing them in ways that don't trigger fight or flight freeze responses anymore. So kind of helping people say, hey, you lived through the worst part of that traumatic experience, the memories that are recurring, the invasive thoughts that are around this trauma, they can be reprocessed in a way that they don't have so much power in your life.
Yeah. The conversation we had, I think was not jarring, but like it got me thinking more about my experience. Like I found myself noticing and thinking about it more, which was causing more anxiety for me, and like more, not like kind of sadness in the sense of like, yeah, I definitely still have it. Like I experience it every day. And my conversations with my therapist were as such. It's like, so have you noticed it this whole time we've been working together? I was like, yeah, I just haven't said anything, but it's always been there. And I think it's still crazy for me to like think about my experience and how my presence and my inability to feel fully present on like a continuous, like a daily basis. So that conversation was illuminating for me and kind of kicked up a bunch of stuff. And we're looking into some treatment options. We'll see that the mushroom stuff they don't do in Minnesota. They only do it in Oregon, which
there's a shocker.
Oregon. You do anything in Oregon. Is it Oregon or Oregon? I don't know how you say it. But yeah, this whole episode is supposed to be about dissociation, but that's all I got really, is that I looked into psilocybin and I'm still feeling it, the dissociation, on a daily basis. And I don't know what to do. It's weird to think that one moment could have such a lasting impact on a life. Like it almost seems ludicrous. Like a part of my brain is like, there's no way that one moment could have changed your experience for the rest of your life. But then another part of me is like, well, so am I making this up? Like, what gives?
Yeah, like what if that moment is...
Why do I feel different?
Living through what are they... IED, what is it? Improvised explosive device, IED. Like what if that's your moment where it's that kind of a trauma, and you didn't see it coming, and you were feeling one way in one moment, and then you've got another way that you're, to totally compromise your safety, the way you're thinking about your the rest of your life.
It is.
So that's what trauma's about, right?
And it's like, but yeah. I wish I could understand what is actually what happened. Like I wish someone could be like, a doctor could be like, oh, okay, Alex, so here's what happened. You overstimulated this part of your brain, and in order to compensate, this part of your brain decided to do this, and so X, Y, and Z happened. And then in order to reverse it, you got to do A, B, and C.
My guess is that you could go to a neuropsychologist. They could probably explain things like that to you.
Yeah.
And if you went to an EMDR person, they would explain a different way that they think about it. And if you went to a holistic homeopath, they'd explain a different thing. So how do you make sense of that, right?
I know, that's the part. And that was what came up when George, he listed all the treatment options. And there was like 10. And it's like, oh, man.
10 treatment options from 10 different
yes.
people affiliated with 10 different disciplines is my guess.
With 10 different approaches.
Yeah.
And
so what does that tell you?
that the brain is a complicated organ and we're never going to understand it. And we're just all just throwing darts at a board. And
some of them land.
some of them land. So, I mean, maybe it's like when you ask that question, the question I immediately ask myself is, do you just like, why do you need to know?
Yeah, that's one of the questions. That's a good question to ask.
Maybe it's not about, maybe you got to let knowing go. Maybe certainty has left the building. You know, certainty went out to buy a pack of smokes. She ain't coming back.
So a friend of mine, a very famous woman in our field, her name's Pauline Boss, talks about ambiguous loss. I don't know if you've heard of that term before.
No, I'm not.
So she started, when she was in graduate school, she started researching, she was at Madison.
Great school.
She started researching what she called psychological father absence. In her family therapy practice, she would see these dads who were present in the family, but they were emotionally disconnected. And was noticing that there's something about his physical presence in stark contrast to his emotional absence. Like wrapped up in the same person was this conundrum, right? Well, he's there, he's just not there.
Yep.
And she eventually, over time, this became what she called ambiguous loss. Other examples of ambiguous loss are like POWs. That, you know, POWs, MIA, you see that flag that we post at places throughout the United States, right? This idea that we think that there may be people who are still alive in some way, but we've never had a body to grieve them.
Yeah.
They're lost to us, but they still live in our memories. They still live to some degree because we're not sure. We haven't had the ability to mourn the loss specifically. So a kid gets kidnapped, and until there's a body that's found, we assume the kid is alive. Elizabeth Smart, back in Utah, who kidnapped and lived several months or so, kind of away from where she lived in her home outside of Salt Lake City. Ambiguous loss. We just went as a nation, as a world, through a lot of ambiguous loss related to COVID. Like, what are we going through right now? How do we explain it? We don't have a language for it.
So it's kind of like, I'm trying to wrap my brain around it, but it's like ambiguous loss is something where it's like it's had an emotional effect on you, but you can't really associate it to a tangible, like physical thing. Like you're not given closure.
Not given closure. And one of the things my colleague Pauline Boss talks about is we live in a society based on mastery, right? Our education is about, once you master the content, then you're given the degree.
Yeah.
And we do that in life. So I want to keep running until I get my running, to where I feel comfortable with it. I want to master this thing. So I want to master information. I want to master this grieving process. My father dies, and then I grieve it, and so a lot of us approach the world as if it's something that we need to master, instead of getting to this place where, like, this is one of the things that I'm just going to have to deal with. I'm going to have to deal with this being unfinished.
Yeah. To that end, so I've wanted to master dissociation.
Yeah.
And that is so true, right? This burning desire to, like, have a solution, to solve, right? There's a problem, it must be solved, as opposed to looking at it as we talked about this in one session, where it's like existence is kind of a quagmire in and of it. Like, it's a pretty broad, big thing, and for us to exist on a blip of it, maybe look at it in terms of, like, mastery. There's nothing to master. Do you think, not to shift suddenly, but is that something that's just Western culture? Is that just the U.S.? Do they look into that?
I haven't spent a lot of time in other cultures, right? Most of my experiences of the world is within Western cultures in Europe and here in North America.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think, particularly in market-driven economies and technology, like technology, like your phone, talk about mastering the world. I have this device that I carry with me at all times to give me knowledge and to give me truths about my living situation and things like that. So I do think that we may be more prone to mastery and seeking and to trying to achieve mastery in our culture.
As opposed to, when is it good to just go with let it go? Let go with the flow. Yeah, I mean, it's tough because a part of me looks at that as like giving up.
What, going with the flow?
Yeah. It's like, well, I don't want to quote unquote give up. I don't want to look at it as, it's like to go back to a missing person, to make that analogy. It's like, well, do I just accept them as lost or do I keep looking? Maybe if I keep looking, I'll find them.
Yeah.
But if I stop looking, so
I don't want to be the one to give up hope. When you talked initially about dissociation, I think you talked about like it feels like a piece of my brain is gone.
yeah, turned
Like
off, sleeping.
Turned off.
Yeah.
Oh,
And it's like, I want to turn it back on.
And so what if there's a part of me that wonders, well, what if Alex is just in touch with things that maybe other people aren't in touch with? Like,
Aware of things.
oh yeah, maybe he's just aware of that there's this bigger part that none of us access, and most of us don't dive down to investigate that in to any degree.
It's an interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't thought about that.
I mean, there's some kind of statistic out there about humans only use X% of their brain, right? I don't know what it is, and I don't even know what that means necessarily.
Yeah, me either.
But if there's any truth to that, then I would say, so is Alex missing a part of the brain that he wasn't going to use anyway?
Yeah.
Or is Alex missing, like, this is a vital part that I should be using, but I'm not using it? And most people do access this, not the 90% that we don't access. And how about dolphins who have those two like mega hemisphere brains?
I don't know about dolphins, Dr. Steve.
Gosh,
What should I know about the dolphins? They got two big brains?
they have huge brains.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and zipper teeth.
The teeth I know.
Yeah.
Listening to you talk about that, a part of me starts to wonder too if, like, in terms of my journey with this feeling and this experience of dissociation, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
it's like, I've been looking at it as, okay, it's important for me to fix it. But is another way of looking at it to be, it's important for me to understand what happened, like to accept that something traumatic happened to me when I was young, and to like process that and to come to peace with the fact that this happened, and then to move on from it and to be like, okay, if things are different, if things are the same, it doesn't really matter. What really matters is just go through that moment, acknowledge that it happened, it affected you in some way, and that you're still okay and you're still happy and you're still surrounded by people who love you and blah, 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 blah. You know?
I think you've just outlined two different paths.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think either one of them is fine.
Right. Yep.
Like go down and find acceptance down this route with total understanding about how all the dots are connected, or go down this path and reach an understanding that I may never connect the dots, and can I find acceptance of myself in either of those paths? Okay, I went down the left path and it's because of X, Y, and Z, and okay, I've made my peace with that. Or I go down the right path and I realize it's multifaceted, there's all these other variables in play, and I'll never understand it. I can get my head around that too. And can I be good with myself regardless of how... Can I be good with myself regardless of how broken I feel? And if I'm broken, is it possible that other people are equally broken? And that's okay. We can just be a bunch of broken people who find comfort and joy in being with comfort and joy.
Maybe the weird thing is being not broken. Like, that's the rare thing.
Yeah.
But also, too, it's like, it's not lost upon me that as I was describing dissociation and like which path do I take, I'm pretty much in my mind, I'm like, okay, how do I master this? Right? Like, I'm definitely trying, like, well, which is the right direction? That was the question I found myself wanting to ask you. Right? Which assumes that there is one, and then it's just, I struggle with not being able to be in control of stuff, not understanding things. Mm-hmm. Uncertainty is really hard for me. It just like makes me so uncomfortable, and it's sort of like it can cause me to, I don't know, lose touch with reality, and kind of just, I almost feel like people will be like, just you need to calm down. It's there's no right or wrong. It's just, chill out, man. But uncertainty is very tough for me, as I'm sure it is with most people. But that was Yeah, the discussion on dissociation was kicked up a lot of that stuff. And a different person reached out and was like, I had a similar experience where I had a traumatic event. This person had an auto accident, and they had, I think there was like parallel where they were like, I was convinced, was I still unconscious? I don't know. I felt different, blah, blah, blah. So there was some sort of semblance of like, okay, maybe I'm not the only one, which that was reassuring.
Yeah, and it may be that dissociative experience is related to a different realm altogether than what we experience on a daily basis. It might be tapping into some kind of extra dimension or spiritual dimension or spiritual realm. If you're inclined that way, that might be one of the filters that you look at it through. Like, oh, I was having some kind of an experience with the divine, or I was having some kind of an experience with other entities that are, unseen or not seeable to the eye, the human eye, or whatever.
I hadn't thought about it that way too. Yeah. It really comes down to this idea of mastering. I want to feel like I have mastered. I sometimes wonder if a big reason I continue therapy, and a reason why I'm doing this podcast is because my brain has become so obsessed with this idea of like, well, there are problems and I got to solve them. I maybe have talked about this before, but sometimes I'm a little concerned that maybe a part of, like, this is all intertwined with this idea of mastery, right? And I'm just looking and trying to
Someday I'll get it all figured out. If I tweak the right things in the right places at the right times, then I'll have it all figured out. It'll all fall into place. Yeah, I don't think you get that.
I know.
I don't think any of us get it.
Which,
but I think people get it enough to where they go, I'm cool with where this is.
Yes.
And I'm cool with not knowing this part.
Yep. My therapist, George, said that a big part of that comes with having kids.
Big part of?
He described it as like, we were talking about something similar, and he was like, I've noticed, Alex, that he talked about it in his life, I have been able to let go of more and more of those things. This idea of needing to be in control of, this, and like career-wise and aspirations and stuff like this. Starting a family and raising a family allowed me to like let go of more and just kind of be more present with what is. And I don't know if that's something you hear, but I wonder that too. It's like, a part of me is like, maybe it's like, okay, I have a couple of kids and it'll sort itself out.
Yeah.
Which is
take two of these and call me in the morning. It's quite the prescription.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, in terms of just like,
so there's no doubt that being responsible for another living entity opens you up to more therapeutic experiences, opens you up to connecting dots. The way you think about the family you were raised in comes into play when you are raising somebody else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so you think differently. It's like, oh, I used to think this way about mom and dad. Now that I've got a kid who's doing X, Y, and Z, I'm getting, I see why they did what they did.
Perspective.
Or, I vowed I would never be like that, and yet I'm doing that still. And so it's.
The reason I ask is because I feel like there is this general idea, and I'm not saying it's right, that like you just start to realize so much more about life once you have kids. So in that way, it's a little enticing to be like, oh, enlightenment, just need babies.
Yeah, you won't need to go to therapy anymore.
Yeah, and I know I joke about it, but like, I bet there are a lot of people who, I definitely think there's like people have kids to try and fix things in life. And I know that sounds a little judgmental.
But if you're thinking a kid will fix it, it just won't.
I know
whatever it is, it just won't.
Yeah. We'll just make it.
But you'll learn something. Like everything's a learning experience. You're going to walk away with that. Like, okay, I didn't know that about myself.
Yeah.
If you're open to it.
Yeah.
But having kids, you can also approach having kids, I would imagine, like other things, and not be open to it. And you can be closed off and have the world all figured out. I'm more scared by people who have the world all figured out than people who have their questions about it.
Yeah. Yes.
I would rather
Yes.
people have questions and not have everything figured out.
I would like to feel more comfortable with the fact that I will always have questions for the rest of my life. Like, I wish that didn't cause me so much stress and anxiety, and I could be more at peace with that.
I think when you have questions about things, you may be able to approach the world in an attitude of seeking understanding as opposed to seeking to explain everything to people.
Yeah. Yes. That's what I'm motivated by. I want to understand more stuff. And
I think that that's one of the reasons why we have so much political bifurcation in our world right now. It's because people have it all figured out.
yeah.
And they're not. I'm not curious about your perspective anymore.
Yep.
Because I know what you're all about.
I know. Yep.
You know?
I know better.
So that's our prejudices. That's our bigotry. I know what your people are about, and I want no part of it. But when I'm curious, then I can find connection, and I can find some places where we can meet. And
So you mentioned a lot. You've talked a lot about, people don't need therapy; they need therapeutic moments.
yeah,
I think one of the reasons one of the reasons I find this to be a therapeutic moment and therapy to be therapeutic moments is because it offers me an opportunity to like achieve more understanding in a weird way. Like, it's not
about yourself.
about myself,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
about like, I love the idea of this is what I'm thinking, and to have someone engage with it and be like, well, that just because you think that way doesn't mean it's necessarily true. It could
Yeah.
be this way or this way or this way. And then I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And it's almost like it nudges me towards this realm, like away from mastery, right? It kind of like calms me down in terms of like, oh yeah, like, okay, you don't need to have everything figured out. Like, you can just, many, 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 many things are true.
Mm-hmm.
There's not just one truth, and like, that's okay. Just calm down. So I think
that can be a hard thing for people to admit or to come to a realization of or to make space for in their own thinking.
how so?
Well, I just think that's how our prejudices
Oh.
get reified, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've got it figured out. I don't need to know anything more. Oh, but let me present you with some information that challenge your prejudice a little bit.
Yeah.
You used to think this group of people was this way. I want to share with you an experience where
That's different.
someone from that group is not that way. What do you do with this? Oh, well, I had it all figured out. But if I'm humble enough and I'm not seeking mastery, but seeking understanding, then I think
Yeah.
less stress in our world,
Yep.
more openness, more ability to connect to other people.
If anyone's wondering where I'm going with this, I think I've sort of landed on it in my head, which is, I think therapy is good, but it definitely requires some humility, right? Because you have to be open to things about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be really, really, really hard. But like, it also can be really calming and reassuring in a way, because again, my big thing is I get the most stressed and anxious when I'm focused on mastery and being right and knowing and stuff like that. I don't think that's a good pursuit for me. Like, it doesn't leads to kind of annoying side effects. Whereas when I go to therapy and I am given opportunities to be more understanding of myself, it pushes me in this new direction of just, I don't know what the opposite of mastery is, but that process is very therapeutic.
What do you think the opposite of mastery is?
I almost want to describe it as like, it's like kind of the Zen-y, like Buddhism. I don't know, like I'm like floating in a raft down the river, like, I don't know what the word is, but it's just like,
I mean, the one that comes to my mind is acceptance.
yeah, acceptance. Yes. And acceptance can be really hard for me because again, it makes me like I've been conditioned. I don't know where this voice comes from, but there's this voice that's really loud that says, Alex, acceptance is synonymous for giving up. And I don't
resignation.
Yes, and I'm not saying that I believe that, but it's loud and it's persistent, and it can kind of be like, it's like this when I'm doing with my hand. It's like always there, and it's like yapping at me.
Yeah. So is it important to find out the origin of that, this is where I think some people are like, I need to find out where that voice comes from.
Yes.
You think it's important? I don't know that it's as important to find out where it comes from or realize that it's just this persistent voice. So a lot of people will take that and it's like, it's my family of origin. It's my mother's demanding way or my father's expectations. Or it's, my third grade teacher. I don't know that the origin matters as much as, I know that one of the things that motivates me, that chirps in my ear, is this thing that acceptance is not enough. I've got to go for mastery. I've got to nail it down. I got to figure this out. And then, okay, so try a little bit without mastery.
Accept that it's there. So so basically, as I was talking about that voice, my mind immediately went to mastery mode, which is, where did it come from? How do I get it to stop?
Right.
Where it's like, the skill that I'm trying to learn is this idea of letting it be. And this ties back to, you had asked me, is meditation helpful?
Mm-hmm.
This kind of reminds me of the process of meditation, which is to accept and just to try to connect back to the present and existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I use this term monkey mind, which you were like, what is that? But it's the same idea as like when you're meditating and your thoughts are running all over, the more you try to like constrict that, the more angry the monkey gets. Whereas if you just kind of say, okay, monkey, you're there, you can hop around, but I'm going to go back to my breathing, it slowly starts to calm down. But that process is hard for me. And it's something that therapy helps me with, because it's almost like it grounds me again. Like this conversation we've had just now helps me remember, like, I think what I hold true in my gut, but sometimes I forget, my mind takes me in a different direction. And that's why I find stuff like this to be it's helpful for me. It gives me perspective.
And I do think that the waters we swim in, the cultural Western world waters, are about mastery. I think Pauline, my friend, would say that as well. And so when you're confronted with something you cannot absolutely master, then you have to acknowledge, okay, there's the chirping, there's the desire for mastery, and I'm not in a situation where I can master this. My partner is missing. I miss my partner so much, whatever. But there's no body, so I can't give up hope that my partner's still alive. And if they're still alive, I'm going to live my life a certain way, versus if they're dead, I'm going to live my life a certain way. So now I'm in this ambiguous place, and I've got to navigate this ambiguity differently than when I navigate something I know for sure, locked down.
And so, not to go mastery here, but so when faced with ambiguous loss, one of the responses of it is just acknowledging it.
Big one. Talking about it. Yeah. And acknowledging I'm in this place and mastery is elusive to me right now. I can't mourn. I can't go on with my life. Yeah. You're stuck. You're in this weird place.
And not reading too much into it or extrapolating from it, just acknowledging and continuing.
Acknowledging.
Accepting.
Accepting. Yeah. Some of it is accepting.
Yeah. Ambiguous loss it's fascinating. Yeah. Ambiguity is, I can only imagine those experiences, right, of people who want to mourn, but they don't physically have something to mourn. It would be really challenging.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great place to wrap up this session.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time and your thoughts on ambiguous loss, and for sharing your colleague's subject matter. I'm sure she'd be a big fan of this episode.
If you've ever wondered about, if this term resonates with you, there's a lot of information out there about it, and it's right here, born here at the University of Minnesota. And so
that's cool.
Yeah.
So
kind of Madison as well.
I was going to say it probably originated in Madison and made its way to the University of Minnesota.
Eventually, it was refined here.
I see. Got it. Yeah. No, it's U of M's a great school, and I just like to chirp. All right. Well, thank you. A pleasure as always. And
have a good week.
You do the same, and everyone out there, stay happy. All right. See you.